sun rises over a landscape that exists beyond the reach of human memory, a world where the continents themselves wear different faces, and the air tastes of possibilities not yet written into the book of life. This is the late Triassic, 230 million years before the first human footprint, and the Earth trembles with the footsteps of creatures that will inherit an empire spanning 3 geological periods and 165 million years of uncontested dominance. In the rust-colored valleys of what will someday be called Pangaea, something stirs in the cycad forests, something bipedal and alert, with eyes that catch the slanting morning light like polished amber. The Coelophysis moves through the undergrowth with a grace that seems almost familiar, almost bird-like, though birds themselves are still tens of millions of years away from their first tentative flights. Its body stretches no longer than a grown man lies tall, but there is an efficiency to its design that speaks of survival, of adaptation, of a blueprint that will be refined and magnified across the ages to come. The creature's head swivels on a flexible neck, nostrils flaring to catch the scent of prey or predator, and its hands flex with 3 clawed fingers that can grasp and tear with equal facility. Nearby, a small cynodont freezes mid-stride, its mammalian ancestors' warm blood coursing through veins that pulse with terror because it has heard what the morning breeze carries, the soft whisper of scales against ferns, the barely perceptible shift of weight from one taloned foot to another. The Coelophysis strikes with a speed that makes the movement almost invisible, and the cynodont's brief squeal dies in its throat as jaws lined with small serrated teeth close around its neck. This is not cruelty, but necessity, the fundamental equation of existence in a world where every calorie consumed is a victory against entropy and extinction. The theropod feeds quickly, eyes never ceasing their surveillance of the surrounding forest, because even a predator must fear becoming prey in this ancient hierarchy of hunger. The Triassic world is one of recovery, of ecological niches slowly filling in the aftermath of the Permian extinction that nearly ended all life on Earth. The dinosaurs that emerge from this crucible are not yet the titans that will shake the continents, but they carry within their bones the genetic instructions for greatness. In the river valleys where cycads and ferns grow thick enough to block the sun, another pioneer makes its ponderous way through the vegetation. Plateosaurus moves on 4 legs when feeding, but can rear up on its hind limbs to reach the higher branches where the tenderest shoots grow beyond the reach of smaller herbivores. Its neck extends forward, surprisingly long for this early stage of sauropodomorph evolution, and its jaws work methodically at the tough plant fibers that will fuel a body weighing as much as 4 tons. The creature's size offers protection from all but the largest predators, and it moves through its territory with the confidence of an animal that has found a successful strategy in a world still experimenting with body plans and ecological roles. Around its feet, tiny mammals scurry through the leaf litter, no larger than mice, their evolutionary destiny constrained by the success of these reptilian giants that will monopolize the large-bodied niches for longer than the mammals can possibly imagine. The Plateosaurus pauses in its feeding to emit a low-frequency rumble from deep within its chest, a sound that carries through the forest like distant thunder, and from the far side of the valley, comes an answering call. Communication, territory, the complex social behaviors that will become hallmarks of the dinosaurian lineages to come, these are already present in these early forms, already being tested and refined by the relentless pressure of natural selection. Millennia blur into epochs as the Triassic gives way to the Jurassic, and the world transforms with a speed that only geological time can achieve, yet seems instantaneous when compressed into narrative. Pangaea begins its slow fragmentation, pulling apart along seams of volcanic fury that pour carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and warm the planet to temperatures that turn the high latitudes into subtropical paradises where no ice cap dares to form. In this greenhouse world, the dinosaurs explode into forms of such variety and scale that they redefine what is possible for terrestrial vertebrates. The Morrison Formation of Western North America, 150 million years ago, hosts a congregation of species that would seem like fantasy if their bones had not been pulled from the sedimentary record in such abundance that their reality cannot be questioned. Here, in river valleys that flood and recede with seasonal regularity, depositing layers of mud that will preserve the death poses of countless individuals, the true giants emerge. Diplodocus stretches its body to lengths approaching 90 feet, its neck alone accounting for more than 20 feet of that impossible dimension, and its tail extends behind in a whip-like appendage that may serve as a weapon or a counterbalance, or simply as a display of evolutionary exuberance. The creature moves through herds that number in the dozens, their footfalls creating a percussive rhythm that can be felt before it can be heard, a subsonic drumming that announces their presence to any creature within miles of their passing. The biomechanics of such scale challenge every assumption about what flesh and bone can achieve. Each vertebra in the Diplodocus's neck is hollowed out by air sacs that connect to its respiratory system, reducing weight while maintaining structural integrity, a solution that parallels the pneumatic bones that will later characterize the flying dinosaurs and their bird descendants. The creature's heart must generate pressures sufficient to pump blood to a head held 20 feet above the ground, requiring a cardiovascular system of extraordinary power and efficiency. When a Diplodocus lowers its neck to drink from a river, the shift in blood pressure creates a physiological crisis that its body has evolved specific adaptations to manage, valves and muscular contractions that prevent the catastrophic pooling of blood in the brain. To watch such a creature drink is to witness engineering on a scale that human technology will not match for another 150 million years, when cranes and suspension bridges finally replicate the principles that evolution discovered through the patient experimentation of mutation and survival. The water parts around the sauropod's muzzle as it submerges its snout, and the pencil-like teeth that line the front of its jaws work to strip aquatic vegetation from the riverbed while simultaneously filtering out the sediment that would be useless or harmful to ingest. Around the drinking giant, smaller dinosaurs maintain a respectful distance, not from fear, but from pragmatism, because a creature of such mass is effectively blind to anything that falls beneath its notice, and being stepped on by a Diplodocus is a death sentence delivered without malice or awareness. In the dappled shade beneath a stand of Araucaria pines, a Stegosaurus browses on the low-growing ferns that carpet the forest floor, its distinctive double row of plates rising along its spine like the sails of some medieval ship rendered in bone and blood. The function of these plates has puzzled paleontologists across the decades since their first discovery, and various theories have been proposed and tested and sometimes discarded. Thermoregulation seems likely, as the plates are shot through with blood vessels that could dissipate heat when the animal becomes overheated or absorb warmth when the morning chill penetrates even this subtropical climate. Display is another possibility, as the plates differ slightly between individuals and could serve as recognition markers or signals of health and genetic fitness to potential mates. Defense seems least likely, as the plates are relatively fragile and poorly positioned to protect against the attacks most likely to prove fatal. But evolution rarely produces structures with only a single function, and perhaps the plates serve all these roles simultaneously, each providing a small selective advantage that accumulates into the difference between lineages that persist and those that vanish. The true weapons of the Stegosaurus lie at the end of its tail, 4 spikes each, as long as a human forearm, and capable of being swung with enough force to shatter bone or puncture the hide of even the largest predators. The creature's brain is famously small, weighing perhaps 2.5 ounces in a body that tips the scales at 5 tons, but this should not be mistaken for stupidity. The Stegosaurus successfully navigates a complex environment, recognizes food from non-food, identifies potential threats, and presumably engages in mating behaviors that require at least rudimentary communication and coordination. The myth of the second brain in the hip, a neural cluster that supposedly controls the hind legs and tail independently, has been thoroughly debunked, but the legend persists because it speaks to something deeply human: our need to explain away the success of creatures that challenge our assumptions about the relationship between intelligence and survival. The forest where the Stegosaurus feeds is not the quiet place that modern woods can sometimes be. The Jurassic world pulses with life at every scale, from the insects that drone through the humid air with wingspans that would dwarf any modern butterfly, to the pterosaurs that soar overhead on leathery wings stretched between elongated finger bones, to the small feathered dinosaurs that hop and chitter in the undergrowth like visions from a future they will never live to see. One of these small theropods, no larger than a crow, displays plumage of iridescent greens and blues that serve no function related to camouflage, and every function related to sexual selection. Evolution has reached a point where mere survival is not enough, where the competition between males for access to females drives the development of traits that may actually reduce fitness in terms of predator avoidance or foraging efficiency, but increase fitness in the only metric that truly matters: the production of offspring that carry one's genes into the next generation. The little dinosaur performs an elaborate dance, spreading its feathered arms and bobbing its head while emitting a series of high-pitched calls that blend music and alarm in equal measure. A female watches from a nearby branch, her plumage duller and more cryptic, and the male's performance intensifies, becomes almost frantic in its energy, until finally she either accepts or rejects his genetic offering with a simplicity that belies the complexity of the evolutionary forces that have brought both creatures to this moment. But the small dramas of courtship and territoriality occur against a backdrop of predation that shapes every behavior and drives every adaptation. Through the sun-dappled clearings where the herbivores congregate, where the juveniles play, and the adults maintain their constant vigilance, there moves a shadow that epitomizes the Jurassic predator. Allosaurus is not the largest carnivore ever to walk the earth, not even the largest of its own time, but it is perhaps the most successful, an apex predator whose remains have been found in such abundance that entire quarries bear its name. The creature stands 12 feet tall at the hips, when its body is held horizontally, as the latest reconstructions insist it must be, with the tail extending straight back as a counterbalance to the massive head that juts forward on a powerful neck. That head is the stuff of nightmares, 2 feet long and armed with teeth that curve backward like scimitars, serrated along both edges to saw through flesh and crush through bone. But it is the skull itself that represents the true innovation, constructed of loosely articulated bones that can flex and bow when stressed, allowing the Allosaurus to survive impacts that would shatter the more rigidly constructed skulls of other predators. This flexibility permits a hunting strategy unique among large theropods. The creature can use its head as a hatchet, driving downward with its neck muscles to deliver slashing bites that open massive wounds in prey too large to be killed by a single attack. The Allosaurus is a bleeder, a patient hunter that can afford to wound and withdraw, following at a safe distance while shock and blood loss do the work that strength alone cannot accomplish. A juvenile diplodocus has become separated from its herd, not through carelessness, but through the inevitable mathematics of group behavior. In any population, some individuals will fall behind, will succumb to illness or injury or simple bad luck, and these are the ones that predators target because the cost-benefit analysis of attacking a healthy adult is rarely favorable. The young sauropod is perhaps 15 feet long, already too large for a single Allosaurus to kill easily, but the predator is not alone. From the forest edge, 2 more individuals emerge, and the mathematics shift decisively. Pack hunting in dinosaurs remains controversial, with evidence both for and against cooperative predation depending on which fossil trackways and bone beds one chooses to emphasize. But whether these Allosaurus are truly cooperating or simply attracted to the same opportunity by independent calculation hardly matters to the juvenile diplodocus. The 3 predators spread out, approaching from different angles, cutting off escape routes with a precision that suggests either intelligence or instinct honed across millions of years to produce the same result. The young sauropod bellows, a sound of pure distress that carries across the valley and brings the adult members of its herd wheeling around with ponderous urgency. But they are too far away, and time has become the predator's ally. The first Allosaurus lunges forward, and the juvenile rears up, front legs pawing the air in a display that might intimidate a lone attacker but proves useless against multiple threats. The second predator seizes the moment of imbalance to rush in from the side, jaws closing on the sauropod's flank, teeth punching through hide and into the muscle beneath. The third Allosaurus targets the tail, and now the juvenile is beset from 3 directions, unable to focus its defense, bleeding from wounds that grow deeper and more numerous with each passing second. The herd arrives in a thunder of footfalls that shake the ground, and the Allosaurus retreat before this overwhelming force, but the damage is done. The juvenile Diplodocus stands swaying, its life bleeding out onto the ferns, and the adults can only watch as it topples sideways with an impact that sends smaller creatures scattering in all directions. The predators wait in the forest shadows, patient now that victory is assured, and when the herd finally moves on, driven by instincts that cannot accommodate grief or lingering, the Allosaurus return to claim their prize. The death of the juvenile sauropod feeds not only the three Allosaurus, but dozens of other species that descend upon the carcass in a hierarchy determined by size and willingness to fight for access. Smaller theropods dart in to snatch morsels when the larger predators are distracted or sated. Pterosaurs circle overhead, waiting for their chance to land and tear at the scraps. Insects swarm, and the bacterial decomposers that are invisible to the eye but essential to the cycling of nutrients begin their work. In death, the Diplodocus continues to support the ecosystem that sustained it in life, its body transformed from a discrete individual into a resource that flows through the food web and eventually returns to the soil from which new plants will grow. This is the circle that governs all life, the fundamental pattern that extinction cannot break, because the pattern itself is larger than any single species or genus or family. The dinosaurs dominate this world so completely that it seems impossible they could ever relinquish their grip. Yet within their DNA are recorded all the contingencies and adaptations that their ancestors survived, all the close calls and evolutionary bottlenecks that might easily have turned out differently. They are kings of their planet, not through any inherent right, but through the accumulated luck and flexibility that allowed their lineages to persist when others failed. The Jurassic reaches its zenith and begins its slow decline into the Cretaceous, and with this transition comes a further flowering of dinosaurian diversity. The continents continue their separation, creating isolated land masses where evolution proceeds along independent trajectories, producing endemic species found nowhere else. Flowering plants appear for the first time, angiosperms that revolutionize the terrestrial ecosystems with their efficiency of reproduction and their ability to form symbiotic relationships with insects that pollinate their blooms. The dinosaurs adapt to these new food sources with characteristic flexibility, and new forms of herbivores emerge to exploit the opportunities that grasses and flowering shrubs provide. In the cooling climate of the late Cretaceous, where seasonal variation becomes more pronounced and the polar regions begin to experience the first intimations of ice, the dinosaurs reach their peak of specialization and variety. Herds of hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, with their elaborate crests and social structures, migrate across the high northern latitudes, timing their movements to coincide with the seasonal greening of the vegetation. Ceratopsians, horned and frilled, develop elaborate ornamentation that serves both as defense against predators and as display in the competition for mates and dominance within the herd hierarchy. And the tyrannosaurids, culminating in the species that will become the most famous dinosaur ever to live, evolved to their ultimate expression. Tyrannosaurus rex stands as the apex predator of the late Cretaceous, 67 million years ago in the humid forests and river plains of western North America. The creature is massively built, weighing perhaps 8 tons, with hind legs like tree trunks and a body held nearly horizontal by a tail so thick with muscle that it serves as a dynamic stabilizer, shifting position constantly to maintain balance as the animal walks. The arms are famously small, seemingly vestigial, yet they retain strength and purpose, capable of lifting several hundred pounds, and armed with 2 clawed fingers that may assist in gripping prey or pushing the animal up from a resting position. The head is enormous, 5 feet long, and equipped with teeth that abandon the blade-like slicing morphology of earlier theropods in favor of thick, bone-crushing spikes designed to generate pressures exceeding 12,000 pounds per square inch. This is not a bleeder like Allosaurus, but a crusher, a predator that can bite through the pelvis of a triceratops or the vertebrae of a hadrosaur, delivering kills that may not be quick, but are inevitable. The eyes face forward, providing binocular vision and depth perception, essential for a predator that must judge distances precisely when charging at speeds that recent biomechanical studies suggest may reach 25 miles per hour for short bursts, not the lumbering giant of early reconstructions, but an athlete capable of explosive acceleration despite its bulk. The world of Tyrannosaurus rex is one of complex interactions and ecological pressures that have shaped a predator of unprecedented capability. The late Cretaceous Hell Creek Formation preserves a snapshot of this ecosystem, layers of mudstone and sandstone that yield the remains of dozens of species living in close proximity and constant interaction. Here, the hadrosaur Edmontosaurus forms the primary prey base, herds numbering in the hundreds that move through the coastal lowlands, feeding on the ferns and flowering plants while remaining constantly alert for the predators that see them as nothing more than ambulatory protein. The Edmontosaurus can reach lengths of 40 feet and weights approaching 4 tons, making them formidable prey even for an adult Tyrannosaurus, and they possess defensive capabilities that should not be underestimated. A blow from the heavy tail can shatter bones, and the herd itself provides safety in numbers, dozens of eyes scanning the forest edge where danger lurks. When a Tyrannosaurus is spotted, the hadrosaurs emit alarm calls that ripple through the herd in waves, a cascading alert system that ensures no individual remains unaware of the threat. The predator must approach with care, selecting its target from among the old, the young, the injured, those individuals whose reduced capacity for flight marks them as the most efficient use of the enormous energy that a hunting Tyrannosaurus must expend. Today, the target is an older female, her hide scarred from previous encounters with predators, and her movements showing the stiffness that comes with age and accumulated injuries. She has survived perhaps 30 years, an impressive span for a creature living in constant danger. But survival is always temporary, and luck eventually runs out. The Tyrannosaurus has been tracking the herd for hours, maintaining a distance that does not trigger full flight response, but keeps the hadrosaurs nervous and moving, prevents them from settling into cohesive, defensive formations. Now, as the sun climbs toward noon and the heat becomes oppressive, the herd slows, and the old female lags just far enough behind to create the opening that the predator has been waiting for. The attack, when it comes, is not the dramatic full-speed charge of popular imagination, but a calculated rush from relatively close range. The Tyrannosaurus emerging from a stand of cycads, perhaps 50 feet from its target. The hadrosaur sees the predator and attempts to accelerate, but age and injury rob her of the speed she needs, and the Tyrannosaurus closes the distance with terrifying swiftness. The initial bite targets the hadrosaur's flank, teeth punching through hide and muscle to scrape against ribs, and the force of the impact sends both animals stumbling. The Tyrannosaurus releases its grip and bites again, higher this time, seeking the spine, and there is a horrible cracking sound as vertebrae fracture under pressures they were never designed to withstand. The hadrosaur collapses, her hind legs no longer responding to commands from a brain that has been cut off from the body by severed spinal cord, and the Tyrannosaurus stands over its fallen prey with a posture that speaks of satisfaction and ownership. The rest of the herd has fled, their survival instincts overriding any impulse to help. And in the sudden silence that follows the violence, the forest seems to hold its breath. But the Tyrannosaurus is not the only power in this landscape. From the forest to the north comes a sound like thunder, a low-frequency rumble that speaks of size and strength and challenge. A second Tyrannosaurus approaches, drawn by the sounds of the hunt, or perhaps simply traversing its own territory and discovering the presence of an interloper. The first Tyrannosaur, still standing over its kill, raises its head and responds with a bellow that combines warning and threat in frequencies that make the air vibrate. The two predators face each other across the fallen hadrosaur, each assessing the other's size and condition, calculating whether the prize is worth the risk of combat. Fighting between Tyrannosaurus individuals is well documented in the fossil record, with healed bite marks on skulls and broken bones that testified of violent encounters. But it is also clear that many confrontations end without physical contact, resolved through displays and vocalizations that establish dominance without the costs that actual fighting imposes. Today, the intruder is smaller, perhaps younger, and after a long moment of posturing, it turns away, ceding the kill to the victor, not from cowardice, but from pragmatism. There will be other opportunities, other prey, and the risk of serious injury is never worth taking unless no alternative exists. The Tyrannosaurus feeds for hours, consuming perhaps 100 pounds of meat in a single session, tearing away chunks that are swallowed whole or with minimal chewing because the teeth are designed for puncturing and gripping, rather than the slicing and processing that mammalian carnivores will later evolve. When finally sated, the predator moves away from the carcass to rest in the shade, its metabolism requiring hours to process such a massive intake of food. In its absence, the scavengers descend, the same ecological parade that attended the death of the Diplodocus 100 million years earlier, proving that the patterns of consumption and recycling remain constant even as the specific actors change. Small theropods with names like Acheroraptor dart in to snatch pieces of flesh, and the pterosaurs, now grown to enormous sizes that dwarf their Jurassic ancestors, land with surprising delicacy to tear at the carcass with beaks designed for precision rather than power. Among these aerial giants is Quetzalcoatlus, perhaps the largest flying creature ever to exist, with a wingspan approaching 40 feet and a body plan so alien that its discovery challenged every assumption about what is possible for a flying animal. When standing on the ground, Quetzalcoatlus towers over most dinosaurs, its elongated neck allowing it to forage for small prey, while its wings fold against its body like a cloak. The creature's hollow bones reduce its weight to perhaps 500 pounds despite its enormous size, and its flight muscles, attached to a sternum enlarged to provide anchoring surface, generate enough power to launch this improbable giant into the air, where it can soar for hours on the thermal currents that rise from the sun-heated plains. In the southern hemisphere, where the fragmenting continents have created isolated evolutionary workshops, the dinosaurs develop along trajectories that diverge from their northern cousins. South America becomes home to the abelisaurids, predators with short, deep skulls and peculiar vestigial arms that make the Tyrannosaurus's forearms look robust by comparison, and to titanosaurs that achieve sizes rivaling or exceeding the largest Jurassic sauropods. Madagascar, already isolated by the growing Mozambique Channel, hosts a menagerie of endemic species found nowhere else, from the predatory Majungasaurus to bizarre herbivores whose anatomies hint at the strange possibilities that emerge when populations are isolated for millions of years. The polar regions, though cooling, remain free of permanent ice, and dinosaurs thrive even in latitudes that experience months of winter darkness, their metabolisms and behaviors adapted to conditions that would challenge ectothermic reptiles beyond their capacity to survive. The question of dinosaur thermoregulation, whether they were truly endothermic, like modern mammals and birds, or employed some intermediate strategy, remains one of the most debated topics in paleontology, with evidence pointing in multiple directions and no consensus yet achieved. What seems clear is that dinosaurs were not the sluggish, cold-blooded creatures of early 20th century imagination, but active, energetic animals capable of sustained activity levels that require either internal heat generation or highly efficient mechanisms for behavioral thermoregulation. The Cretaceous world reaches a peak of biological diversity unmatched in the previous history of terrestrial life, and the dinosaurs stand at the apex of this flourishing. They have successfully occupied every available niche, from tiny insectivores to multi-ton herbivores, from swift pursuit predators to massive ambush hunters, from terrestrial to aerial to even semi-aquatic forms. Their success seems unassailable, their dominance permanent, and if consciousness existed among them to contemplate such things, they might reasonably conclude that their reign will continue for as long as life persists on Earth. But evolution does not promise permanence, and the very factors that have allowed the dinosaurs to thrive, their specialization and their adaptation to specific environmental conditions, become vulnerabilities when those conditions change with catastrophic suddenness. 66 million years ago, on a day that begins like any other day in the millions that have preceded it, the sky above what will someday be the Yucatan Peninsula splits open with a light brighter than 1,000 suns, and the world that the dinosaurs have known for 165 million years begins to end. The asteroid measures perhaps 6 miles in diameter, not particularly large by cosmic standards, but traveling at speeds approaching 45,000 miles per hour. Its kinetic energy dwarfs all the nuclear weapons humanity will ever construct. The impact releases energy equivalent to 100 million megatons of TNT, excavating a crater more than 100 miles in diameter and punching through the Earth's crust to release magma from the mantle below. The initial blast wave levels everything within 1,000 miles, and the heat pulse ignites forests across an entire hemisphere. Rock vaporized by the impact is thrown into the atmosphere and then falls back as tiny glass spherules that heat from friction with the air until they glow red hot, turning the sky into a broiler that bakes everything beneath it. Animals die by the millions in the first hours, not from the impact itself, but from the fires that sweep across continents and the superheated air that sears lungs and desiccates tissues. Those that survive the initial catastrophe face challenges that only worsen as the hours stretch into days and the days into months. The atmosphere fills with dust and ash from the impact and from the global firestorm that follows, blocking sunlight and causing temperatures to plummet. Photosynthesis ceases, and the plants that form the base of every food chain begin to die. The herbivores, deprived of food and unable to access the stored energy that might sustain them through a brief crisis, starve within weeks. The predators, finding their prey populations crashing, turn to scavenging and cannibalism, but these strategies only delay the inevitable. In the oceans, the collapse of photosynthetic plankton cascades through the marine food webs, and the great marine reptiles, the mosasaurs and plesiosaurs that have ruled the seas alongside the dinosaurs' dominance on land, vanish into extinction. The world that emerges from this impact winter is transformed almost beyond recognition. Entire ecosystems have been erased, and the surviving species face a landscape barren of familiar resources. The large-bodied animals are hit hardest, their enormous metabolic requirements impossible to sustain on the meager food supplies that remain. Every non-avian dinosaur species perishes, from the mightiest Tyrannosaurus to the smallest feathered theropods. Their 165 million-year dynasty ended in less than a year of cascading ecological collapse. But extinction is not total, and from the survivors will emerge the ecosystems that will define the Cenozoic era. The small mammals that have lived in the shadows of dinosaur dominance find themselves suddenly freed from competition and predation, and they will diversify to fill the vacant niches with a speed that evolution rarely permits. The crocodilians, already ancient when the asteroid struck, persist by virtue of their aquatic habitats and their ability to survive for extended periods without food. The turtles, the lizards, the amphibians all retain at least some representative species that carry their lineages across the extinction boundary. And the birds, those feathered dinosaurs that took to the air millions of years before the impact, survive in sufficient diversity to ensure that the dinosaurian line does not entirely perish, but continues into the modern world, transformed but unbroken. In the aftermath, as the dust settles and the sun slowly returns to a sky no longer choked with debris, the first green shoots emerge from seeds and spores that have waited in the soil for conditions favorable to germination. The earth, resilient beyond measure, begins the work of recovery, of rebuilding the complex webs of interaction that connect producer to consumer to decomposer. The fossil record of this transition is sparse, preserved only in exceptional circumstances. but it tells a story of both catastrophic loss and remarkable persistence. The mammals that emerge from their burrows to explore a world empty of the giants that once kept them small and nocturnal will eventually give rise to lineages as diverse and successful as the dinosaurs they replace, from whales that return to the oceans to bats that master flight to primates that will one day uncover the bones of Tyrannosaurus rex and attempt to reconstruct the world that existed before the asteroid came. The birds will diversify into thousands of species, from hummingbirds weighing less than an ounce to ostriches standing 8 feet tall, their feathers and hollow bones and efficient respiratory systems all inherited from their dinosaurian ancestors. In every bird that sings in the morning light, or soars on thermal currents, or runs across open ground on 2 legs held beneath the body, the dinosaurs persist not as fossils locked in stone, but as living creatures still exploring the possibilities that evolution offers to those lineages flexible enough to adapt when the world changes. The story of the dinosaurs is many things simultaneously: a chronicle of evolutionary innovation and ecological dominance, a meditation on the impermanence of even the most successful adaptations, a demonstration that life proceeds not toward any goal, but through whatever pathways offer temporary advantages in the endless competition for resources and reproduction. To walk through a modern museum and stand before the mounted skeleton of a Diplodocus or Tyrannosaurus is to confront deep time made tangible, to recognize that the brief span of human existence represents only the most recent instant in a history extending so far into the past that it challenges our ability to truly comprehend the vastness. The dinosaurs ruled for 165 million years, and our species has existed for perhaps 300,000, a ratio that should inspire humility about our own permanence and importance. Yet, we are the ones who dig their bones from ancient sediments, who reconstruct their bodies and behaviors through careful analysis of fossils and trackways, who bring them back to life through art and film and imagination. In this sense, we have resurrected them, given them a second existence in human consciousness that ensures they will never be truly extinct as long as minds remain to contemplate their story. The first kings of the planet left no written records, no monuments to their achievements, no awareness that they were living through one of the most successful chapters in the history of terrestrial life. They lived as all animals live, focused on the immediate challenges of finding food and avoiding predators and reproducing successfully enough to launch their genes into future generations. That they did so for longer than any mammalian lineage has yet achieved speaks to strengths that we are only beginning to understand. Flexible thermoregulation that allowed them to thrive in diverse climates, efficient respiratory systems that supported high activity levels, complex behaviors that ranged from intricate mating displays to possible cooperative hunting to elaborate parental care. The evidence for these behaviors comes not from direct observation, which is forever denied to us, but from the traces they left behind. The fossil eggs carefully arranged in nests, the trackways showing multiple individuals moving in coordinated groups, the healed injuries that testify to survival beyond what solitary animals could achieve. Each new discovery adds detail to the picture, corrects previous misunderstandings, reveals complexity that earlier generations of paleontologists never suspected. The dinosaurs we understand today are not the dim-witted reptilian monsters of Victorian science, but sophisticated animals whose success derived from the same attributes that drive survival in modern ecosystems: adaptability, efficiency, and the ability to exploit opportunities when they arise. As the sun sets over a modern landscape, casting long shadows across ground where dinosaurs once walked, it is worth pausing to acknowledge what was lost when the asteroid struck. An entire world vanished, not just individual animals, but whole ecosystems that had evolved together over millions of years, predators and prey locked in evolutionary arms races, herbivores and plants engaged in parallel adaptations, parasites and hosts, competitors and cooperators, all the intricate relationships that make an ecosystem more than just a collection of species sharing space. The Cretaceous world possessed a complexity and grandeur that we can reconstruct only imperfectly from the fragmentary record, and every species that went extinct represented a unique solution to the challenges of existence, a genomic library of adaptations that could never be recreated, because evolution does not retrace its steps, but only moves forward into new territories. Yet extinction is not failure, but simply the eventual fate of all lineages, and the dinosaurs' 165 million years of dominance represents a success beyond what most groups ever achieve. They were not defeated by superior competitors or betrayed by flaws in their design, but simply caught in the wrong place at the wrong time when cosmic chance intervened to reset the evolutionary game board. The fossils they left behind become time capsules, preserving in stone and mineral the shapes of bodies that once moved through landscapes long since eroded away, that breathed air of different composition under skies of different color, that knew seasons and climates alien to modern experience. To hold a dinosaur tooth is to hold an object that last touched living tissue millions of years before human ancestors descended from the trees. And yet the tooth remains, harder than the flesh it once served, more permanent than the individual that grew it. The fossil record is incomplete, preserving perhaps one species in 10,000, perhaps far fewer, and even for those species fortunate enough to leave fossils, we recover only scattered bones, isolated fragments from which we must infer entire organisms and behaviors. The Tyrannosaurus rex, whose skeleton dominates a museum hall, was assembled from the remains of multiple individuals, composite creations that blend bones from different animals to produce a display that is simultaneously authentic and artificial. Yet even these imperfect reconstructions convey truths about size and anatomy, about how joints articulated and how muscles attach to bones, about the realities of being a 6-ton predator in a world that no longer exists. Technology continues to reveal new insights, new techniques that extract information from fossils in ways that earlier researchers could not imagine. CT scanning shows internal structures without destroying precious specimens, revealing brain cavities and inner ear anatomy that constrain hypotheses about intelligence and sensory capabilities. Chemical analysis of bone and tooth enamel provides information about diet and metabolic rates, about whether these animals were actively growing when they died or had reached mature adult sizes. Computational modeling allows researchers to test biomechanical hypotheses, to simulate how forces would have distributed through bones during running or fighting, to estimate bite forces and locomotor capabilities with precision that moves beyond speculation toward genuine scientific constraint. The study of modern birds, the only living dinosaurs, informs interpretations of extinct species, providing analogies and frameworks for understanding behaviors that left no direct fossil evidence. When we see complex courtship displays in modern birds, we gain confidence that similar behaviors existed in their non-avian relatives, that the feathered dinosaurs of the Cretaceous engaged in dances and vocalizations and competitions as elaborate as anything seen in contemporary peacocks or birds of paradise. The question of color, long considered forever beyond scientific reach, has yielded to unexpected evidence. Microscopic examination of exceptionally preserved feathers reveals cellular structures called melanosomes, whose shape and arrangement determine color in modern birds. And by comparing fossil melanosomes to modern examples, paleontologists can reconstruct at least some aspects of dinosaur coloration. A small theropod called Anchiornis, living in China 160 million years ago, displayed a pattern of black and white stripes with red crests, a combination that serves no obvious camouflage function and therefore likely played a role in communication and display. Such discoveries transformed dinosaurs from the uniform grays and greens of traditional restorations into creatures as colorful and varied as modern birds, and each new find adds nuance to our understanding of how these animals lived and interacted with their worlds. The geographic distribution of dinosaur fossils reveals patterns that reflect both the animal's evolutionary history and the geological processes that preserved or destroyed evidence of their existence. Some formations yield spectacular discoveries, dense concentrations of fossils that preserve moments in time with unusual fidelity. The Gobi Desert of Mongolia has produced remarkable specimens, including fighting dinosaurs frozen in the act of combat, a velociraptor with its sickle claw embedded in the body of a protoceratops, both animals apparently killed simultaneously by a sudden sandstorm or collapsing dune that buried them before scavengers could scatter the bones. Such discoveries are vanishingly rare, requiring precise combinations of rapid burial and favorable preservation chemistry, but they provide windows into behavior that no amount of isolated bone analysis could reveal. The velociraptor, despite its fearsome reputation inflated by popular media, was actually a relatively small predator, standing perhaps 2 feet tall at the hip and weighing no more than 30 pounds, more closely resembling a turkey than a human-sized killer. The sickle claw on the second toe of each foot could be hyperextended and used as a weapon, but biomechanical analysis suggests it served primarily to pin prey, while the jaws delivered killing bites rather than slashing open body cavities as sometimes depicted. Pack hunting behavior in Velociraptor and related dromaeosaurs remains controversial, with trackway evidence suggesting group movement, but no definitive proof of coordinated hunting strategies. Modern predators display a range of social behaviors from strictly solitary to highly cooperative, and there is no reason to assume that all theropod species employed the same strategies. Size likely played a role, with smaller predators potentially benefiting more from cooperation, while large species like Tyrannosaurus were probably solitary hunters outside of mating contexts, capable of taking down prey through individual strength rather than coordinated tactics. The truth is that we will never know with certainty how most dinosaur species behaved, and perhaps that uncertainty is appropriate, a reminder that the past does not yield all its secrets to even the most determined interrogation. What remains is wonder, the imaginative reconstruction of worlds glimpsed only through fragmentary evidence, and the recognition that life has produced marvels far stranger than anything human minds could invent. The Cretaceous seas, though beyond the scope of a documentary focused primarily on dinosaurs, nevertheless deserve acknowledgement as environments where parallel dramas of evolution and extinction played out. The marine reptiles that shared the Mesozoic oceans with the dinosaurs' terrestrial dominance were not dinosaurs themselves, but represented separate lineages that returned to aquatic life from land-dwelling ancestors. The ichthyosaurs, dolphin-like in body shape through convergent evolution, had already declined by the late Cretaceous, but the mosasaurs reached their peak of diversity and distribution, top predators that hunted fish and squid and smaller marine reptiles in seas that covered much of the continental interiors. Some mosasaurs grew to lengths exceeding 50 feet, rivaling the largest great white sharks in size and far exceeding them in bite force. These marine predators vanished in the same extinction event that eliminated the non-avian dinosaurs, victims of the same ecological collapse that cascaded through food webs regardless of habitat. The oceans today host no reptilian predators of comparable size, that ecological role now filled by sharks and toothed whales, demonstrating how extinction creates opportunities for different lineages to radiate into vacated niches. The flowering plants that emerged during the Cretaceous and rapidly diversified to dominate terrestrial ecosystems by the end of the period represent one of the most significant evolutionary innovations of the Mesozoic, transforming landscapes and creating new opportunities for herbivores and pollinators alike. Before angiosperms, the dominant plants were gymnosperms, like cycads and conifers, supplemented by ferns and other spore-bearing plants. These earlier forms certainly supported diverse herbivore communities, but the flowering plants offered advantages in terms of growth rate and nutritional content that the dinosaurs quickly exploited. The hadrosaurs, with their elaborate dental batteries containing hundreds of teeth that constantly replaced themselves, could process tough plant material with an efficiency that allowed them to thrive in environments from coastal lowlands to upland forests. The ceratopsians, with their parrot-like beaks and shearing teeth, likely fed on different plant materials, creating niche partitioning that reduced competition and allowed multiple large herbivore species to coexist in the same habitats. Such ecological complexity required millions of years to develop, accumulating slowly through the minor adjustments and adaptations that natural selection produces, and it was erased in less than a year when the asteroid disrupted the food chains that connected photosynthetic plants to herbivorous dinosaurs to carnivorous predators. The question of whether the dinosaurs were already in decline before the asteroid impact has generated significant debate, with some researchers arguing that diversity was decreasing in the final millions of years of the Cretaceous, while others contend that any apparent decline reflects sampling bias and incompleteness in the fossil record. The most recent analyses suggest that dinosaur diversity remained high right up until the extinction boundary, with no evidence for a gradual decline that might have made them more vulnerable to the impact's effects. This interpretation, if correct, means that the dinosaurs were not failing or losing their grip on dominance, but were simply unlucky, thriving one day and extinct the next by geological standards of time. Such a conclusion carries implications that extend beyond paleontology into questions of contingency and determinism in evolutionary history. If the asteroid had missed Earth, if its trajectory had been slightly different, or its arrival delayed by even a few minutes such that the planet's rotation carried the impact point over ocean rather than shallow continental shelf, would the dinosaurs still rule today? Would mammals have remained small and marginalized, never diversifying into the forms that eventually produced primates and humans? These counterfactual questions cannot be answered scientifically, but they illuminate the role of chance in shaping outcomes that we observe and sometimes mistake for inevitability. The legacy of the dinosaurs extends beyond their direct descendants, the birds, into the very structure of how we understand evolution and deep time. They were among the first extinct animals to be recognized as such, their fossils too large and too different from modern forms to be dismissed as individual aberrations or flood victims. The discovery and description of dinosaurs in the 19th century forced confrontation with the reality that species could go extinct, that the Earth had hosted life forms no longer present, that the history of life was not static but dynamic, characterized by appearance and disappearance, by change over timescales that dwarfed human history. This recognition formed part of the conceptual foundation that allowed Darwin to propose natural selection as a mechanism for evolutionary change, and the dinosaurs have remained central to evolutionary biology ever since, serving as test cases for hypotheses about adaptation, extinction, and the limits of biological possibility. Every child who thrills to pictures of Tyrannosaurus rex or dreams of discovering new species in unexplored badlands is engaging with questions about life's diversity and history, learning to think about time in ways that transcend individual experience and embrace spans measured in millions of years. As a documentary narrative, the story of the dinosaurs must balance scientific accuracy with emotional engagement, must convey both the strangeness of these vanished creatures and their fundamental similarity to modern animals in terms of the challenges they faced and the solutions they evolved. They were not monsters or fantasy creatures, but real organisms, subject to the same physical and biological constraints that govern all life, eating and breathing and reproducing according to principles that remain constant across the eons. The ground they walked on obeyed the same laws of gravity. The air they breathed contained oxygen that fueled metabolisms fundamentally similar to those of modern vertebrates. The sun that warmed them emitted light of the same wavelengths that illuminate contemporary landscapes. The differences lie in details of anatomy and behavior, in the specific solutions that dinosaur lineages discovered through millions of years of evolutionary experimentation. But the underlying framework remains recognizable to anyone familiar with modern ecosystems and their dynamics. To imagine oneself present in the Mesozoic requires simultaneous engagement with the familiar and the alien, recognizing patterns while appreciating differences. The sounds would differ with dinosaur vocalizations, likely including frequencies and timbres unheard in modern environments. perhaps subsonic rumbles from giant sauropods or ultrasonic calls from small theropods. The smells would differ, with novel combinations of plant volatiles and animal scents, creating olfactory landscapes that no modern human has experienced. The colors would differ, with atmospheric conditions and sun angle producing skies of subtly different hues and plants displaying pigments not found in contemporary flora. Yet the basic rhythms would remain familiar: the daily cycle of dawn and dusk, the seasonal progression from wet to dry or warm to cool, the constant interplay of predator and prey, the reproductive urgencies that drive mating displays and territorial conflicts. Life would be recognizable as life even as specific manifestations took forms that modern eyes have never witnessed except through the reconstructive imagination that paleontology enables. The documentary form demands narrative structure, requires that the vast spans of geological time be compressed into sequences that human minds can process, and emotional beats that audiences can follow. This necessitates selection and emphasis, choosing certain species to feature while neglecting others equally valid, but perhaps less visually striking or behaviorally interesting. The Tyrannosaurus rex dominates popular consciousness, despite existing only in the final few million years of the Cretaceous and being confined geographically to North America, while equally impressive predators from other times and places remain obscure outside specialist literature. The Diplodocus serves as ambassador for all sauropods, its form and behavior standing in for dozens of species that differed significantly in anatomy and ecology. Such simplification risks distortion, but complete comprehensiveness would paralyze narrative momentum, would bury audience attention under avalanches of names and dates and phylogenetic relationships. The art lies in selecting details that illuminate larger patterns, species that exemplify broader trends, moments that crystallize extended processes into scenes that can be visualized and emotionally processed. The choice to use present tense narration throughout serves multiple functions, creating immediacy that helps overcome the alienating effect of deep time, while also emphasizing that these events, though ancient, were not abstract, but consisted of real moments experienced by individual animals, as present and urgent as anything occurring in modern ecosystems. When the juvenile Diplodocus falls to the Allosaurus pack, the tragedy is not diminished by having occurred 150 million years ago. In the moment of its occurrence, the death was absolute and present, the pain and terror as real as anything experienced by contemporary animals in similar circumstances. The present tense refuses to consign these events to safely distant once-upon-a-time status, insisting instead that they occupy the same ontological category as events happening now, separated by time but not by reality or significance. The anthropomorphic technique of imagining dinosaur thoughts and emotions remains controversial in scientific circles, with strict behaviorists arguing that we cannot know the internal experiences of extinct animals and therefore should not speculate about them. Yet to refuse any imaginative engagement with dinosaur consciousness seems to deny them something fundamental, to reduce them to mere mechanisms rather than experiencing subjects. Modern birds clearly have rich mental lives, displaying problem-solving abilities and emotional responses that suggest awareness and intentionality. And it seems reasonable to infer that their non-avian relatives possessed similar capabilities, scaled to their own cognitive architecture. A Tyrannosaurus pursuing prey would experience something analogous to what a modern predator experiences, perhaps not identical in phenomenological texture, but occupying the same category of goal-directed behavior, motivated by internal states that we recognize as hunger or determination. To completely avoid suggesting any interiority to dinosaur behavior would produce narratives that feel strangely hollow, populated by automatons rather than animals, and that hollowness would constitute its own distortion, equally inaccurate in the opposite direction from excessive anthropomorphism. The challenge is calibration, finding language that suggests agency and experience without importing specifically human emotions or motivations that would be genuinely inappropriate. Dinosaurs did not feel pride or shame, did not contemplate mortality or legacy, did not tell stories or build cultures. But they did feel hunger and satiation, fear and safety, the drives to mate and to defend territory, the discomfort of injury and illness, the satisfactions of successful predation or feeding. These are the building blocks of vertebrate consciousness, present in all animals with sufficiently complex nervous systems, and there is no reason to think dinosaurs lack them simply because they are extinct and therefore cannot be directly observed. The narrative walks a line between scientific conservatism that refuses to speculate beyond direct evidence and imaginative engagement that brings these vanished creatures to life as experiencing subjects rather than fossil abstractions. As the narrative approaches its 60,000 character conclusion, the necessity of addressing meaning and significance becomes unavoidable. What does the dinosaur story tell us beyond the specific facts of their biology and extinction? Perhaps the most important lesson concerns contingency, the role of chance in determining outcomes that retrospectively appear inevitable but actually depended on countless small variations that could easily have turned out differently. The mammals did not inherit the Earth through superiority, but through survival when other lineages failed, and their subsequent success derives not from virtues that guaranteed dominance, but from opportunities that opened when competitors vanished. This should instill humility about our own position, recognition that human dominance is not the culmination of evolutionary progress, but simply the current state of a process that continues without goal or endpoint. The dinosaurs were no less successful for having gone extinct, and their 165 million years of dominance exceeds by far the duration that mammals have held equivalent status. If humanity persists for even a fraction of that span, we will have done well by evolutionary standards. Another lesson concerns resilience and adaptation, the remarkable capacity of life to persist through catastrophes that seem world-ending, but ultimately prove to be transitions rather than terminations. The extinction that ended the dinosaurs' reign was horrific by any standard, eliminating perhaps 75% of all species and completely restructuring terrestrial ecosystems. Yet life recovered within a few million years, diversifying to fill the vacant niches and creating assemblages as complex as those that preceded the impact. The Earth has experienced multiple mass extinctions across its history, each one pruning the tree of life severely, but never cutting it down entirely, and each time the survivors have radiated to restore diversity and complexity. We currently live in a period of elevated extinction, driven by human activities, sometimes called the sixth mass extinction, though its severity remains debatable, and the dinosaur extinction offers both warning and reassurance. The warning is that dominant groups can fall with terrifying speed when environmental conditions change beyond their capacity to adapt. The reassurance is that life itself persists, that ecosystems rebuild, that extinction creates space for new forms to emerge and flourish. The birds that descended from theropod dinosaurs represent both continuity and transformation, carrying forward the genetic heritage of their ancestors while adapting to ecological roles quite different from those their dinosaurian forebears occupied. A hummingbird hovering before a flower embodies capabilities its Cretaceous ancestors never developed, yet the hollow bones and efficient respiratory system that enable its improbable hovering flight evolved tens of millions of years before flowers existed, adaptations that found new uses in changed circumstances. Evolution proceeds through such repurposing, features that evolve for one function later proving useful for entirely different purposes, and the unpredictability of these shifts makes evolutionary forecasting effectively impossible. We cannot know what forms life will take in the far future, what lineages will thrive and which will perish, what innovations will emerge from the constant experimentation that mutation and selection produce. The only certainty is change itself, the guarantee that the world 100 million years from now will be as different from the present as the present is from the Cretaceous, populated by organisms we cannot imagine, descended from ancestors we barely notice. The dinosaurs ruled the Earth longer than any other terrestrial vertebrate group has managed, and their fossils will outlast our own by millions of years, stone archives that will persist long after human civilization has crumbled to dust and been recycled through geological processes that acknowledge no sentimental attachment to cultural achievements or artistic creations. The fossils will remain, mute testimony to lives lived and species vanished, and perhaps some future intelligence will study them as we do now, marveling at the sizes achieved and the adaptations evolved, and the ultimate failure to survive when conditions changed catastrophically. Or perhaps no such future intelligence will emerge, and the fossils will lie undiscovered in their sedimentary tombs until tectonic forces subduct them into the mantle, where heat and pressure erase all record of the individuals they once preserved. Either way, the dinosaurs will have had their reign, their millions of years of dominance, during which they transformed terrestrial ecosystems and pushed the boundaries of what vertebrate bodies could achieve. They were the first kings of the planet in any meaningful sense, the first group to dominate not just locally, but globally, not just temporarily, but across time spans that dwarf subsequent dynasties. Their success was real, their adaptations effective, their evolutionary legacy embodied in every bird that takes flight on wings inherited from theropod ancestors. To study them is to study excellence in adaptation and the limits of evolutionary success, to confront both the power and the fragility of even the most successful life forms. They earned their crown through millions of years of evolutionary refinement, and they lost it through no fault of their own, but through cosmic chance that no amount of adaptation could have prevented. In their rise and fall lies the entire arc of life's trajectory on Earth: emergence, diversification, dominance, and ultimate vulnerability to forces beyond control. This is their story, rendered as completely as fragmentary evidence permits. And it is also our story, because we too are products of the same evolutionary processes, subject to the same constraints, equally vulnerable to the contingencies that can elevate or eliminate entire lineages in the blink of geological time's indifferent eye.